Title of this book, Status Anxiety, by author Alain de Botton. The following excerpt is a part of the free sample made available to the public on Google Books. Should you wish to obtain the complete book, it is readily purchasable on the aforementioned platform. The subject matter of this book revolves around status, its development, and its advantages and disadvantages. This recording aims to offer insights into one of humanity's profound desires. Furthermore, when considered in conjunction with the video entitled Book of Hebrews, Lesson 2, Part 3 on YouTube channel In Step by Dante Brown, one arrives at the realization that the only genuine and ultimate status, the status yearned for by all individuals, is to be bestowed upon faithful followers of Jesus Christ at his second coming. Such status shall be perpetually enjoyed in the new heaven and new earth. Status anxiety. Definitions. Status: one's position in society. The word derived from the Latin statum, or standing, past participle of the verb stare, to stand. In a narrow sense, the word refers to one's legal or professional standing within a group, married, a lieutenant, etc. But in the broader and here more relevant sense, to one's value and importance in the eyes of the world. Different societies have awarded status to different groups: hunters, fighters, ancient families, priests, knights, vacant women. Increasingly, since 1776, status in the West, the vague but comprehensible territory here under discussion, has been awarded in relation to financial achievement. The consequences of high status are pleasant. They include resources, freedom, space, comfort, time, and, as importantly perhaps, a sense of being cared for and thought valuable, conveyed through invitations, flattery, laughter, even when the joke lacked bite, deference, and attention. High status is thought by many, but freely admitted by few, to be one of the finest earthly goods. Status anxiety, a worry so pernicious as to be capable of ruining extended stretches of our lives, that we are in danger of failing to conform to the ideals of success laid down by our society, and that we may, as a result, be stripped of dignity and respect. A worry that we are currently occupying too modest a rung or are about to fall to a lower one. The anxiety is provoked by, among other elements, recession, redundancy, promotions, retirement, conversations with colleagues in the same industry, newspaper profiles of the prominent and the greater success of friends, like confessing to envy, to which the emotion is related. It can be socially imprudent to reveal the extent of any anxiety, and therefore evidence of the inner drama is uncommon, limited usually to a preoccupied gaze, a brittle smile, or an overextended pause after news of another's achievement. If our position on the ladder is a matter of such concern, it is because our self-conception is so dependent upon what others make of us. Rare individuals, aside Socrates, Jesus, we rely on signs of respect from the world to feel tolerable to ourselves. More regrettably still, status is hard to achieve and even harder to maintain over a lifetime, except in societies where it is fixed at birth and our veins flow with noble blood. Our position hangs on what we can achieve, and we may fail due to stupidity or an absence of self-knowledge, macroeconomics, or malevolence. And from failure will flow humiliation, a corroding awareness that we have been unable to convince the world of our value and are henceforth condemned to consider the successful with bitterness and ourselves with shame. Thesis: that status anxiety possesses an exceptional capacity to inspire sorrow. That the hunger for status, like all appetites, can have its uses, spurring us to do justice to our talents, encouraging excellence, restraining us from harmful eccentricities, and cementing members of a society around a common value. But, like all appetites, its excesses can also kill. That the most profitable way of addressing the condition may be to attempt to understand and to speak of it. Part 1. Causes. Lovelessness. Our need for love. Our desire for status. 1. Every adult life could be said to be defined by two great love stories. The first, the story of our quest for sexual love, is well known and well charted. Its vagaries form the staple of music and literature. It is socially accepted and celebrated. The second, the story of our quest for love from the world, is a more secret and shameful tale. If mentioned, it tends to be in caustic, mocking terms, as something of interest chiefly to envious or deficient souls, or else the drive for status is interpreted in an economic sense alone. And yet this second love story is no less intense than the first. It is no less complicated, important, or universal. And its setbacks are no less painful. There is heartbreak here too. 2. Adam Smith, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Edinburgh, 1759. To what purpose is all the toil and bustle of this world? What is the end of avarice and ambition, of the pursuit of wealth, of power and preeminence? Is it to supply the necessities of nature? The wages of the meanest laborer can supply them. What then are the advantages of that great purpose of human life, which we call bettering our condition? To be observed, to be attended to be taken notice of with sympathy, complacency, and approbation, are all the advantages which we can propose to derive from it. The rich man glories in his riches because he feels that they naturally draw upon him the attention of the world. The poor man, on the contrary, is ashamed of his poverty. He feels that it places him out of the sight of mankind. To feel that we are taken no notice of necessarily disappoints the most ardent desires of human nature. The poor man goes out and comes in unheeded, and when in the midst of a crowd is in the same obscurity as if shut up in his own hovel. The man of rank and distinction, on the contrary, is observed by all the world. Everybody is eager to look at him. His actions are the objects of the public care. Scarce a word, scarce a gesture that fall from him will be neglected. 3. The predominant impulse behind our desire to rise in the social hierarchy may be rooted not so much in the material goods we can accrue or the power we can wield, as in the amount of love we stand to receive as a consequence of high status. Money, fame, and influence may be valued more as tokens of and means to love rather than ends in themselves. How may a word generally used only in relation to what we would expect or hope from our parent or a romantic partner be applied to something we might want from and be offered by the world? Perhaps we can define love at once in its familial, sexual, and worldly forms as a kind of respect, a sensitivity on the part of one person to another's existence. To be shown love is to feel ourselves the object of concern. Our presence is noted. Our name is registered. Our views are listened to. Our feelings are treated with indulgence, and our needs are ministered to. And under such care, we flourish. There may be differences between romantic and status forms of love. The latter has no sexual dimension. It cannot end in marriage. Those who offer it usually bear secondary motives, and yet status, beloveds will, just like romantic ones, under the benevolent gaze of appreciative others. People who hold important positions in society are commonly labeled somebodies, and their inverse, nobodies, both of which are, of course, nonsensical descriptors, for we are all, by necessity, individuals with distinct identities and comparable claims on existence. Such words are nevertheless an apt vehicle for conveying the disparate treatment accorded to different groups. Those without status are all but invisible. They are treated brusquely by others, their complexities trampled upon, and their singularities ignored. While there will inevitably be economic ramifications, the impact of low status should not be read in material terms alone. The gravest penalty rarely lies above subsistence levels, at least in mere physical discomfort. It consists more often, even primarily, in the challenge that low status poses to a person's sense of self-respect, provided that it is not accompanied by humiliation. Discomfort can be endured for long periods without complaint. For proof of this, we have only to look to the example of the many soldiers and explorers who have over the centuries willingly tolerated privations far exceeding those suffered by the poorest members of their societies, so long as they were sustained throughout their hardships by an awareness of the esteem in which they were held by others. The benefits of high status are similarly seldom limited to wealth. We should not be surprised to find many of the already affluent continuing to accumulate sums beyond anything that 5 generations might spend. Their endeavors are peculiar only if we insist on a strictly material rationale behind wealth creation. As much as money, they seek the respect that stands to be derived from the process of gathering it. Few of us are determined ascetics or sybarites, yet almost all of us hunger for dignity. And if a future society were to offer love as a reward for accumulating small plastic discs, then it would not be long before such worthless items, too, assumed a central place in our most zealous aspirations and anxieties. 4. William James, The Principles of Psychology, Boston, 1890. No more fiendish punishment could be devised, were such a thing physically possible, than that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed by all the members thereof. If no one turned around when we entered, answered when we spoke, or minded what we did, but if every person we meet cut us dead and acted as if we were non-existent things, a kind of rage and impotent despair would before long well up in us, from which the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief. 5. How are we affected by an absence of love? Why should being ignored drive us to a rage and impotent despair? Besides which, torture itself would be a relief. The attentions of others matters to us because we are afflicted by a congenital uncertainty as to our own value. As a result of which affliction, we tend to allow others' appraisals to play a determining role in how we see ourselves. Our sense of identity is held captive by the judgments of those we live among. If they are amused by our jokes, we grow confident in our power to amuse. If they praise us, we develop an impression of high merit. And if they avoid our gaze when we enter a room or look impatient after we have revealed our occupation, we may fall into feelings of self-doubt and worthlessness. In an ideal world, we would be more impermeable. We would be unshaken whether we were ignored or noticed, admired or ridiculed. If someone praised us insincerely, we would not be unduly seduced. And if we had carried out a fair assessment of our strengths and decided upon our value, another suggestion that we were inconsequential would not wound us. We would know our worth. Instead, we each appear to hold within ourselves a range of divergent views as to our native qualities. We discern evidence of both cleverness and stupidity, humor and dullness, importance and superfluity. And amid such uncertainty, we typically turn to the wider world to settle the question of our significance. Neglect highlights our latent negative self-assessments, while a smile or compliment as rapidly brings us to the converse. We seem beholden to the affections of others to endure ourselves. Our ego or self-conception could be pictured as a leaking balloon, forever requiring the helium of external love to remain inflated, and ever vulnerable to the smallest pinpricks of neglect. There is something at once sobering and absurd in the extent to which we are lifted by the attentions of others and sunk by their disregard. Our mood may blacken because a colleague greets us distractedly, or our telephone calls go unreturned. And we are capable of thinking life worth living because someone remembers our name or sends us a fruit basket. The consequences of neglect. Others' attitude. You are a failure. You are unimportant. You are dim. Self-image. I am a disgrace. I am a nobody. I am stupid. I am worthy. I am significant. I am intelligent. The consequences of love. Others' attitude. You are successful. You are important. You are bright. Self-image. I am worthy. I am significant. I am intelligent. I am a disgrace. I am a nobody. I am stupid. 6. Given the precariousness of our self-image, it should not be surprising that, from an emotional point of view, no less than from a material one, we are anxious about the place we occupy in the world. This place will determine how much love we are offered, and so in turn, whether we can like or must lose confidence in ourselves. It holds the key to a commodity of unprecedented importance to us, a love without which we will be unable to trust or abide by our own characters. Expectations. Material progress. 1. In July 1959, the American Vice President, Richard Nixon, traveled to Moscow to open an exposition showcasing some of his country's technological and material achievements. The highlight of the exhibition was a full-scale replica of the home of an average member of America's working class, equipped with fitted carpets, a television in the living room, 2 en-suite bathrooms, central heating, and a kitchen with a washing machine, a tumble dryer, and a refrigerator. Reporting on the display, an incensed Soviet press angrily denied that an ordinary American worker could conceivably live in such luxury, and advised its readers to dismiss the entire house as propaganda after mockingly baptizing it the quote-unquote Taj Mahal. When Nixon led Nikita Khrushchev around the exhibition, the leader was comparably skeptical. Outside the kitchen of the model home, Khrushchev pointed to an electric lemon squeezer and remarked to Nixon that no one in his right mind would wish to acquire such a silly gadget. Anything that makes women work less hard must be useful, suggested Nixon. We don't think of women in terms of workers like you do in the capitalist system, snapped an irate Khrushchev. Later that same evening, Nixon was invited to appear live on Soviet television. On occasion, he used to expound on the advantages of American life. Shrewdly, he did not begin his speech by touting democracy or human rights. Instead, he spoke of money and material progress. Nixon explained that in just a few hundred years, Western countries had managed, through enterprise and industry, to overcome the poverty and famine that had gripped the world until the middle of the 18th century and continued even up to the present day to plague many other nations. Americans had purchased 56 million television sets and 143 million radios, he informed his Soviet listeners, a large number of whom did not have private bathrooms or possess so much as a kettle. The members of the average American family could buy 9 new dresses and suits and 14 new pairs of shoes every year, he noted. And some 31 million families owned their own homes. In the United States, houses could be had in 1,000 different architectural styles, most boasting greater square footage than the television studio they were broadcasting from. Sitting next to Nixon, an infuriated Khrushchev clenched his fist and mouthed, "Niet, niet," adding under his breath, according to one account, expletive, your grandmother. 2. Khrushchev's protestation notwithstanding, Nixon's statistics were accurate. In the 2 centuries preceding his speech, the countries of the West had witnessed the fastest and most dramatic elevation of living standards in human history. The majority of the population of medieval and early modern Europe had belonged to the peasant class, impoverished, undernourished, cold, and fearful while alive. They were usually dead following some further agony before their 40th birthday. After a lifetime of work, their most valuable possession might have been a cow, a goat, or a pot. Famine was never far off, and disease was rife, among the most common conditions being rickets, ulcers, tuberculosis, leprosy, abscesses, gangrene, tumors, and cankers. 3. Then, in early 18th century Britain, the Great Western Transformation began, thanks to new farming techniques, including crop rotation, scientific stock breeding, and land consolidation. Yields began to increase sharply. Between 1700 and 1820, Britain's agricultural productivity doubled, releasing capital and manpower that flowed into the cities to be invested in industry and trade. The invention of the steam engine and the cotton power loom modified not only working practices, but social expectations. Towns exploded in size. In 1800, only one city in the British Isles, London, could boast a population of more than 100,000. By 1891, 23 English cities would make that claim. Goods and services that had formerly been the exclusive preserve of the elite were made available to the masses. Luxuries became decencies, and decencies necessities. Daniel Defoe, traveling around southern England in 1745, noted the proliferation of large new shops with enticing window displays and tempting offerings. Whereas for much of recorded history, fashion had remained static for decades at a time. It now became possible to identify specific styles for every passing year. In England in 1753, for example, purple was in vogue for women's gowns. In 1754, it was the turn of white linen with a pink pattern. In 1755, dove gray was the rage. The 19th century expanded on and spreaded the British consumer revolution. Gigantic department stores opened throughout Europe and America. The Bon Marché in Paris, Selfridges and Whitley's in London, Macy's in New York. All were designed to appeal to the new industrial middle class. At a ribbon-cutting ceremony marking the opening of a 12-story Marshall Fields in Chicago in 1902, the manager, Gordon Selfridge, proclaimed, "We have built this great institution for ordinary people so that it can be their store, their downtown home, their buying headquarters. It was not intended," he emphasized, "just for the swagger rich." A host of technological inventions helped to stretch mental horizons even as they altered the patterns of everyday life. The old cyclical view of the world, wherein one expected next year to be much like and just as bad as last, gave way to the notion that mankind could progress yearly towards perfection. To list only a few of these inventions: cornflakes, patented by J.H. Kellogg in 1895. Kellogg had hit upon the concept by accident when the grain mixture he served to inmates in his sanatorium unexpectedly hardened and then shattered into flakes. The can opener, patented in 1870. The safety pin, invented in 1849. The sewing machine, developed by I.M. Singer in 1851. Ready-made clothes would become more common from the 1860s. Machine-made underclothes would be introduced in the 1870s. The typewriter, invented in 1867. The first full-length manuscript to be typed was Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi, published in 1883. Processed foods. By the 1860s, the British company Cross and Blackwell was producing 27,000 gallons of ketchup a year. In the early 1880s, the chemist Alfred Bird came up with an eggless custard powder. Bobonge powder was developed in the 1870s and jelly crystals in the 1890s. Lighting. Steric candles were used from the 1830s, replacing the much shorter-lived tallow dip candles of old. Sanitation. In 1846, Dalton began manufacturing glazed stoneware pipes, which sparked a revolution in metropolitan sewerage. By the late 1870s, public toilets had begun to spring up in Europe and America. George Jennings' famous pedestal vase of 1884 stunned the public with its ability to wash away, as its advertisement put it, 10 apples and a flat sponge with a 2-gallon flush. The telephone, invented by Alexander Graham Bell, 1875. Dry cleaning, invented in 1849, began manufacturing glazed Jolly Bellin, who accidentally spilt turpentine on a tablecloth and found that on the patch the spill covered, stains had disappeared. By 1866, Pullers of Perth was offering a postal 2-day dry cleaning service anywhere in the British Isles and had improved on Jolly Bellin's cleaning fluid with a formula combining petroleum and benzene. 4. Material progress accelerated still further in the 20th century. In his English Journey, 1934, J.B. Priestley observed that a New England had taken shape, a country of arterial roads and bungalows whose inhabitants, for the most part ordinary workers, read tabloid newspapers, listened to the radio, spent their leisure hours shopping and looked forward to rising incomes year after year. In this England, for the first time, he asserted, Jack and Jill are nearly as good as their master and mistress. George Orwell, in The Lion and the Unicorn, 1941, sketched a similar picture of the Western material revolution. Nearly all citizens of civilized countries now enjoy the use of good roads, germ-free water, police protection, free libraries, and probably free education of a kind. To an increasing extent, the rich and the poor read the same books, and they also see the same films and listen to the same radio programs. The differences in their way of life have been diminished by the mass production of cheap clothes and improvements in housing. The place to look for the germs of the future, England, is in light industry areas and along the arterial roads in Slough, Denham, Barnet, Lynchworth, Hayes, everywhere indeed. On the outskirts of great towns, the old pattern is gradually changing into something new. In those vast new wildernesses of glass and brick, there is a rather restless, cultureless life, centering around tin food, picture posts, the radio, and the internal combustion engine. When Franklin D. Roosevelt was asked what one book he would give the Soviet people to teach them about the advantages of American society, he singled out the Sears Roebuck catalog. Amid the economic expansion that followed the Second World War, Westerners, and in particular Americans, became the most privileged and the most harried consumers on the planet. Across the United States, new longings were created by the development of shopping malls, which enabled citizens to browse at all hours in climate-controlled environments. When the Southdale Mall opened in Minnesota in 1950, its advertising promised that every day will be a perfect shopping day at Southdale. By the 1970s, Americans were estimated to be spending more time at the mall than anywhere else other than their workplaces and their Taj Mahals. Equality, expectation, and envy. 1. The benefits of 2,000 years of Western civilization are familiar enough. An extraordinary increase in wealth, in food supply, in scientific knowledge, in the availability of consumer goods, in physical security, in life expectancy, and economic opportunity. What is perhaps less apparent and more perplexing is that these impressive material advances have coincided with a phenomenon left unmentioned in Nixon's address to his Soviet audience: a rise in the levels of status anxiety among ordinary Western citizens, by which is meant a rise in levels of concern about importance, achievement, and income. A sharp decline in actual deprivation may, paradoxically, have been accompanied by an ongoing and even escalating sense or fear of deprivation. Blessed with riches and possibilities far beyond anything imagined by ancestors who tilled the unpredictable soil of medieval Europe, modern populations have nonetheless shown a remarkable capacity to feel that neither who they are nor what they have is quite enough. 2. Such feelings of deprivation may seem less peculiar if we consider the psychology behind the way we decide precisely how much is enough. Our judgment of what constitutes an appropriate limit on anything, for example, on wealth or esteem, is never arrived at independently. Instead, we make such determinations by comparing our condition with that of a reference group, a set of people who we believe resemble us. We cannot, it seems, appreciate what we have for its own merit, or even against what our medieval forebears had. We cannot be impressed by how prosperous we are in historical terms. We see ourselves as fortunate only when we have as much as or more than those we have grown up with, work alongside, have as friends, or identify with in the public realm. If we are made to live in a draughty, insalubrious cottage and bend to the harsh rule of an aristocrat occupying a large and well-heated castle, and yet we observe that our equals all live exactly as we do, then our condition will seem normal. Regrettable, certainly, but not a fertile ground for envy. If, however, we have a pleasant home, a comfortable job, but learned through ill-advised attendance at a school reunion that some of our old friends, there is no more compelling reference group, now reside in houses grander than ours, bought on the salaries they are paid in more enticing occupations than our own, we are likely to return home nursing a violent sense of misfortune. It is the feeling that we might, under different circumstances, be something other than what we are, a feeling inspired by exposure to the superior achievements of those whom we take to be our equals, that generates anxiety and resentments. If we are short, say, but live among people of our same height, we will not be unduly troubled by questions of size. But if others in our group grow just a little taller than us, we are liable to feel sudden unease and to be gripped by dissatisfaction and envy, even though we have not ourselves diminished in size by so much as a fraction of a millimeter. Given the vast inequalities we are daily confronted with, the most notable features of envy may be that we manage not to envy everyone. There are people whose enormous blessings leave us wholly untroubled, even as others' negligible advantages become a source of relentless torment for us. We envy only those whom we feel ourselves to be like. We envy only members of our reference group. There are few successes more unendurable than those of our ostensible equals. 3. David Hume, A Treatise on Human Nature, Edinburgh, 1739. It is not a great disproportion between ourselves and others which produces envy, but on the contrary, a proximity. A common soldier bears no envy for his general compared to what he will feel for his sergeant or corporal, nor does an eminent writer meet with as much jealousy in common hackney scribblers as in authors that more nearly approach him. A great disproportion cuts off the relation, and either keeps us from comparing ourselves with what is remote from us, or diminishes the effects of the comparison. It follows that the greater the number of people whom we take to be our equals and compare ourselves to, the more there will be for us to envy. If the great political and consumer revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries cause psychological anguish while vastly improving the material lot of mankind, it was because they were founded on a set of extraordinary new ideals, a practical belief in the innate equality of all human beings, and in the unlimited power of anyone to achieve anything. For most of history, the opposite assumption had held sway, with inequality and low expectations being deemed both normal and wise. Very few among the masses had ever aspired to wealth or fulfillment. The rest knew well enough that they were condemned to exploitation and resignation. It is clear that some men are by nature free and others by nature slaves, and that for these latter, slavery is both expedient and right. Aristotle declared in his Politics 350 BC, voicing an opinion shared by almost all Greek and Roman thinkers and leaders in the ancient world. Slaves and the members of the working class in general were considered to be not truly human at all, but a species of creature, lacking in reason and therefore perfectly fitted to a life of servitude, just as beasts of burden were suited to tilling fields. The notion that they might have rights and aspirations of their own would have been judged by the elite no less absurd than, say, an expression of concern for the thought process or level of happiness of an ox or an ass. The belief that inequality was fair, or at least inescapable, was also subscribed to by the oppressed themselves. With the spread of Christianity during the later Roman Empire, many fell prey to a religion that taught them to accept unequal treatment as part of a natural, unchangeable order. Notwithstanding the egalitarian principles embedded within Christ's teachings, there was little suggestion on the part of Christian political theorists that the earthly social structure could or should be reformed so that all members of the church might share more equitably in the wealth of the land. Humans might be equal before God, but this offered no reason to start seeking equality in practice. For these theorists, a good Christian society instead took the form of rigidly stratified monarchy, a design said to reflect the ordering of the celestial kingdom. Just as God wielded absolute power over all creation, from the angels down to the smallest toads, so too his appointed rulers on earth were understood to preside over a society where God had given everyone his and her place, from the nobleman down to the farmhand. To have accused a medieval English aristocrat of snobbery for his attitudes to those below him in the hierarchy would have made no sense. A derogatory term for segregation could make an appearance only once a more egalitarian way of looking at people had come to seem a possibility. Sir John Fortescue, a 15th century English jurist, was merely restating an idea taken for granted throughout the medieval period when he explained, "From the highest angel down to the lowest, there is no angel that is without both a superior and an inferior. Nor from man down to the meanest worm is there any creature which is not in some respect superior to one creature and inferior to another." To challenge why some were compelled to till the soil while others feasted in banqueting halls was, in the dominant ideology, to challenge the Creator's will. With his Polycrates, 1159, John of Salisbury had become the most famous Christian writer to compare society to a human body, to use that analogy to justify a system of natural inequality. In Salisbury's formulation, every element in the state had an anatomical counterpart. The ruler was the head, the parliament was the heart, the court was the sides, officials and judges were the eyes, ears and tongue, the treasury was the belly and intestines, the army was the hands, and the peasantry and laboring classes were the feet. This image reinforced the concept that every member of society had been assigned an unalterable role, a scheme that made it no less ludicrous for a peasant to wish to take up residence in a manor house and have a say in his own governance than for a toe to aspire to be an eye. 5. Only in the middle of the 17th century did political thinking begin to venture in more egalitarian direction. In Leviathan, 1651, Thomas Hobbes contended that the individual predated society and had formed and joined it for his own benefit, willingly surrendering his natural rights in exchange for the protection offered by a group or sovereign. This seminal point would be reiterated a few decades later by John Locke in his Two Treatises of Government, 1689. God had not, Locke reasoned, bestowed on Adam private dominion over the earth. Rather, he had given the world to mankind in common for the enjoyment of all. Rulers were the instruments of the people and were fit to be obeyed only insofar as they served their subjects' interests. Thus was born an astonishing new idea that governments justify their existence only by promoting possibilities for prosperity and happiness among all those they rule over. The theoretical impulse towards political equality and more equitable social and economic opportunities for all, after being in the ether of a century and a half, finally found dramatic, concrete expression in the American Revolution of 1776. Perhaps more than any other event in Western history, even the French Revolution that would succeed it, the war for independence altered forever the basis upon which status was accorded. In a stroke, it transformed American society from a hereditary aristocratic hierarchy, a sphere in which upward mobility was restricted and a person's status depended exclusively on the lineage and distinction of his or her family, into a dynamic economy in which status was awarded in direct proportion to the, largely financial, achievements of each new generation. By 1791, the geographer Jedediah Morse could describe New England as a place where every man thinks himself at least as good as his neighbors and believes that all mankind have, or ought to possess, equal rights. Even etiquette was democratized. Servants, though not slaves, had ceased addressing their employers as master or mistress. And in Charleston, South Carolina, the city council had banned the use of the title Esquire and His Honor. All American states legislated against primogeniture and granted equal property rights to daughters and widows. The physician historian David Ramsay, in his oration on the advantages of American independence, delivered on 4th of July, 1778, proposed that the goal of the Revolution had been to establish a society in which all offices lie open to men of merit of whatever rank or condition. Even the reins of state may be held by the sons of the poorest man, if he is possessed of abilities that are equal to this important station. In his autobiography, Thomas Jefferson avowed that his own energies had been directed towards creating an opening for the aristocracy of virtue and talent, to replace the old culture of privilege and, in many cases, brute stupidity. Decades later, in Leaves of Grass, 1855, Walt Whitman would identify the greatness of America specifically with equality and its citizenry's native lack of deference. The genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislators, nor it this concludes the excerpt of Status Anxiety. To get an accurate understanding of the Christian life view in regards to status and the basis of this life view, we again direct you to the Book of Hebrews Study Guide playlist on the In Step by Dante Brown YouTube channel, video entitled Lesson 2, Part 3.